You are still doing it. You still answer, still arrange your voice, still find the generous interpretation before the anger has finished forming. Nothing in your life has changed yet, but something inside the doing has gone wrong, and you cannot name it, and it will not let you rest. The message arrives with a name you know well. Before you have finished reading it, the reply is already assembling itself inside you, patient and warm and faintly apologetic. Your thumb rests above the screen and does not move. Your chest has gone still, and the stillness is not calm. You have decided this means something is wrong with you, that you are hardening, that the compassion is running out like a store you failed to protect. That is the only interpretation available to a person who has spent their life being the one who understands. But nothing in you has run out. What has happened is stranger, and it has already changed more than you realize. The part of you that agreed to this arrangement has stopped agreeing. It withdrew somewhere behind your attention, and it did not ask you first. Unbearable is not the same as difficult. You have done difficult for years without complaint. Difficult was manageable because something came back to you through it. Unbearable begins when the same effort continues and nothing returns through it at all. Notice where it happens now. The call from a family member you have always taken, the colleague who begins a sentence with your name in a particular tone, the friend who tells you the same story about the same person for the 4th year. You still respond. You respond well, and something behind your eyes has stepped back. You hear your own voice from a small distance while you use it. It is a good voice. It says the right thing at the right moment. And you listen to it the way you would listen to a competent stranger handling something that no longer belongs to you. The response still arrives, but it now costs something it never used to cost. There is a delay before the warmth, a half second where you must locate it and bring it forward manually. Before it came without being fetched. That half second is the whole subject of your life right now. Through a Jungian lens, what you are calling your kindness is partly persona, not a lie, not a mask worn cynically. Persona is the social form a person builds in order to belong, to function, to remain welcome in the rooms they need. Yours became unusually good at its job, and because it was good, it was rewarded, and because it was rewarded, it grew, until the sensitivity that was once simply how you experienced other people became a position you were expected to hold. You did not choose the position on a specific day. You accepted it in 1,000 small moments where accepting it made the room easier. Here is what people rarely say about a role like yours. It was not only a burden, it paid you. Being the one who understood meant being kept. No one leaves the person they rely on. Your usefulness was not just an obligation. It was the most dependable form of belonging you ever had. That is why the role held for so long. You were not weak for maintaining it. You were accurate. In the world you actually lived in, absorbing other people's emotional weather was the surest way to remain necessary. And being necessary felt close enough to being loved that the difference did not need examining. What has changed is the exchange. You still perform the work. The payment has stopped arriving. You give the same attention, the same patience, the same careful reading of the mood before you speak, and afterward there is no warmth in you where the warmth used to be. only a flat tiredness that arrives before the conversation begins. Your body has been tracking this longer than your mind has. You wake earlier than you need to on the days that require you. Your jaw sets before a familiar number appears. Your shoulders rise slightly when someone says they need to talk, and they lower only when the door closes behind them. And then, because you are who you are, you take this evidence and use it against yourself. You decide that a person who feels this way about the people they love has become someone worse. The tiredness becomes proof of a character flaw rather than information about an arrangement. There is a private trial you have been conducting for months. You are the accused and the prosecutor and the only witness. The charge is that you have become selfish. The evidence is that you no longer want to do freely what you were never actually free to refuse. Look at what that guilt accomplishes. While you are busy interrogating your own character, the arrangement itself stays completely undisturbed. Everyone keeps their access. Nothing has to be renegotiated. The problem has been safely relocated inside you, where it can be worked on forever without inconveniencing anyone. Not moral failure, then, but the last mechanism holding the old agreement in place. Guilt is what a role uses to keep a person inside it after the person has stopped consenting. It is the final wall, and it is built out of your own best qualities. Meanwhile, nobody around you has noticed anything. This is the part that frightens you. You are still reliable. You still remember birthdays and check in after difficult weeks and know which subject to avoid. From outside, the performance is flawless, which means no one is coming to ask whether you are still in there. So you live two lives at the same time. One of them is doing exactly what it has always done. The other one is standing slightly behind it, watching, taking notes, growing quieter and less willing by the week. You assume the watching one is the problem. It is not. It is the one that woke up. That split is not a sign that your life is about to change. That split is the change. It has already occurred. Everything visible is simply lagging behind it. The way a building stands for a while after the ground beneath it has shifted. You can see it in where your irritation lands, not on the people who ask most of you, on the slow driver, on a request from someone who has never taken anything from you before, on a stranger who does nothing worse than need directions when your hands are full. The anger goes sideways because straight ahead is unthinkable. To feel it toward the people it belongs to would mean admitting what those relationships have actually been organized around, and that admission has consequences you have not agreed to face, so it exits through the nearest unimportant door. And beneath the anger there is something older that has no name in your vocabulary. Every year you spent reading The Room, there was a version of you that wanted something for itself and did not mention it. That wanting did not die. It waited. What waits long enough eventually returns as intolerance for the arrangement that postponed it. This is what the title of your own situation actually means. Before anything visible happens, before a conversation, before a decision, before anyone else is told, the old role stops being habitable from the inside. The unbearableness is not a warning about a change that is coming. It is the change arriving first as sensation. The reason it feels like madness is that nothing external supports it. Your calendar is the same. Your relationships are the same. The people who need you still need you in exactly the way they always have. You have no incident to point to, no injury you could describe to anyone without sounding ungrateful. That is precisely what makes it unbearable. Not conflict, not cruelty, the smooth, unbroken continuation of something that no longer has your agreement. A machine running perfectly on a fuel it stopped being given. There are sentences that now form completely in your mouth and are never spoken. You feel them arrive, whole, and then you feel your throat close over them. And then you say the other thing, the acceptable thing, and something in you registers the substitution and files it away. You have been counting those substitutions without meaning to, not consciously, but some part of you has kept the record, and the record is now long enough that it has begun to argue with your idea of who you are and what you were doing all these years. None of this began when you noticed it. The tiredness did not start on the day you first admitted it. What you are meeting now is not a new feeling. It is the surfacing of a structure you did not build deliberately, working according to rules you were never told, and now finally loud enough to hear. You were never sat down and told what your position was. That is what makes it difficult to see now. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no moment where someone explained the terms and asked whether you accepted them. The structure assembled itself out of ordinary approving sentences said by ordinary people who meant them kindly. Somewhere fairly early, someone described you as the one who could be counted on, perhaps a teacher, perhaps a relative, perhaps a manager years later. The word landed differently than praise usually landed. It did not describe how you looked or what you produced. It described a place you occupied in other people's arrangements. You remember the feeling more clearly than the sentence, a settling, a sense of having been assigned coordinates. Before that, you were a person of uncertain, standing in every room you entered. Afterward, you had a function, and a function is something no one has to like you in order to keep. That is the part worth slowing down on. It was not that you were asked to carry things and could not refuse. It was that being asked was the first time your presence had an obvious reason. The request located you. Affection was unpredictable. A request was proof you were in the room for a purpose. Once you accept praise for a capacity, the capacity quietly converts into a debt. Reliability is not a compliment you can put down. It is a standard you have agreed to meet indefinitely. And every time you meet it, the standard renews itself without discussion. Watch how it spread. At work you became the one problems were brought to before they became official. Not through promotion, through repetition. Someone learned that difficult conversations went better if you were in them, and told someone else. And within a few years, your actual job had a second job growing inside it that appeared on no document. In friendship, the same architecture appears in softer material. You know the details of their marriages, their fears about their parents, the thing they have never told anyone else. They know your outline. They could describe you accurately and never once say something you would recognize as private. Here is the fact that resists your usual explanation. You did not merely get selected for this, you selected too. Among all the people you could have moved toward, you consistently moved toward the ones with something unfinished in them, and you called that instinct compassion. Because a person who needs something is legible, you know immediately what to do, where to stand, how the exchange works. Someone who wants nothing from you produces a silence you do not know how to occupy. Within minutes, you are searching them for a difficulty you could help with, and the searching feels involuntary. Think of the last time someone offered you something with no expectation attached. Notice what happened in your hands. Notice the speed at which you produced a reason to decline, or a promise to repay, or a joke that moved the attention back to them. That speed was not politeness. It was avoidance moving faster than thought. In Jungian terms, this is a complex, not a defect, an old emotional structure that organizes your reaction before your conscious mind arrives with an opinion. By the time you notice you are deflecting, the deflection is already complete, and your explanation for it is manufactured afterward. What the whole arrangement protected was not other people. It protected you from a specific exposure to sit with someone contributing nothing, offering no help, holding no useful position, and to be kept there anyway would have tested something you have never allowed to be tested, and it gave you a kind of control that is rarely named. When you are the one giving, you always know your standing. You can measure it. You can see the effect. Being on the receiving side means the answer is held by someone else, and you would have to wait for it without influence. So the usefulness was never only servitude. It was also a way of never having to discover whether you would be chosen without it. As long as you were needed, that question stayed unopened. You did not avoid closeness. You built a version of it that could not deliver the verdict you feared. That is the bargain beneath the visible one. Giving preserved your information about your own value. Receiving would have taken that information away and returned nothing certain in its place. What everyone read as generosity was also a way of keeping the accounts in your own hands, which means, in a way, you will resist. You were unreachable throughout. You were present constantly and available always and known by almost no one. And this was not done to you alone. Part of the arrangement was your design, and it worked, and it kept you safe from something. Your body carries the evidence of this more honestly than your memory does. When attention turns toward you in a group, something in your throat prepares a redirection. Before you have decided anything, your hands find a task. Your shoulders lift half an inch and stay there until the subject has moved on. Meanwhile, the reading of other people became involuntary. You cannot switch it off now, even when you are exhausted, even when you do not like the person, even when you have promised yourself you will stay out of it. You enter a room and the emotional arithmetic runs without your permission, and here is a reversal that changes the history you have told about yourself. Your sensitivity did not create this role. The role took a real sensitivity and trained it into an obligation until a way of perceiving became a duty to respond. And no distinction remained between noticing something and being responsible for it. That distinction is the one you have never been allowed to hold. Other people notice attention in a room and let it pass. For you, noticing initiated a chain. Perceive, interpret, adjust, absorb. The chain was so fast and so complete that you experienced it as your personality. Consider what that has cost in the present. Ask yourself, in an ordinary week, what you actually want, and notice that the question produces almost nothing, not because you have no desires, because desire developed no muscle. Every preference you had was routed immediately into what would be workable for everyone else. What was postponed did not vanish. Jung understood that the unlived part of a person does not politely dissolve because it was inconvenient. It waits underground and continues to exist, and it eventually returns as restlessness, as refusal, as a strange loss of appetite for the life you carefully built. But the deeper weakness in the structure is elsewhere. Belonging through necessity is only renewable while you remain necessary. It cannot rest. It cannot be assumed. Every period of stability requires a new demonstration, and the demonstrations must continue for as long as the belonging is meant to last. For years, the demonstrations were enough. The people you carried stabilized, crises resolved, marriages held together partly because you were there, and each time you waited for something to change in how you were held, and each time the situation simply returned to normal, with you in the same position. You have been waiting for a conversion. That is the private hope underneath everything, the one you would never say aloud, that one day the giving would be seen so clearly that it would turn into something else, that someone would put down what they were carrying, look at you, and ask. So it was never only a sacrifice, it was a wager. You placed years of usefulness on the possibility that usefulness would eventually be exchanged for being known. What is happening to you now is that wager coming due, and the payment not arriving, and the wager itself finally becoming visible, and no one broke a promise, because no promise was ever spoken. Nobody agreed to convert your reliability into intimacy. They received what they were offered and behaved reasonably. This is why your anger has no proper address, and why it keeps leaking sideways onto people who owe you nothing. You saw it at the last family gathering. You were carrying plates through a room where the conversation continued perfectly well without you, and you felt relief at having a task. And underneath the relief, something colder, something that noticed how easily the room absorbed your absence, and how quickly it would notice your failure to serve. The structure is still standing. Everyone still occupies their positions. Your part of it is still expected daily, and you can still perform it. And something inside you has stopped producing the material the performance requires. And there is nothing waiting behind it, no prepared alternative, no other way of being with people that you have practiced, no version of yourself that knows how to enter a room without a reason. That absence is the part nobody warns you about. You imagined that if the role ever loosened, something more honest would be underneath it, waiting. What is actually underneath is a blankness. You stand in the kitchen at the end of an ordinary evening. Nothing required of you for the first time in weeks, and your hands do not know where to be. The tiredness has stopped behaving like ordinary tiredness. It does not respond to sleep. You wake at the same early hour with the same weight already in place, and it lifts slightly at strange moments. In a supermarket, in a car park, in the 20 minutes when nobody knows where you are, that is your first honest piece of information. Relief arrives in the gaps, not in rest, not in holiday, not in the evenings you had planned to enjoy, It arrives specifically when you are unaccounted for. The exhaustion is not from effort, it is from being locatable. You have begun arranging small disappearances. The long route home, the errand that could have taken 10 minutes taking 40, the phone left face down in another room for an afternoon you will later describe as being busy. You have not admitted to yourself that these are being arranged, and when someone finds you inside one of them, when a call comes through during the stolen hour, notice what your voice does. It shifts up half a tone. It becomes warm and immediate and entirely convincing. You hear yourself do it, and you keep doing it. And afterward, you sit in the car and cannot look at what just happened. Now, the harder part, there is something in you that has begun to want the phone not to ring, and that wanting has an edge to it that is not sadness. When a plan collapses, when someone cancels, when a family member's crisis resolves itself without you, there is a small hard satisfaction that arrives before you can suppress it. You have decided that satisfaction is the proof that underneath the caring person there was always something ungenerous, and it is finally surfacing, and everything before it was performance. That is the conclusion available to someone who has only ever had two categories, good and bad, and no third place to stand. But look at what the satisfaction actually attaches to, not their misfortune, their independence. You are not glad they are suffering. You are glad they managed without you. And the gladness is complicated because it is also the thing you most fear, and both feelings are true in the same second. Because if they can manage, then the whole structure was less necessary than you were told. And if it was less necessary, then years of your life were spent maintaining something that would have held anyway. That thought is unbearable in a different register from the rest, and you have kept it moving so it never sits down. Here is where the ungenerous thing has to be looked at directly. There were times you did not want them to manage without you, times you offered before you were asked, filled a space before anyone could learn to fill it themselves, made yourself the route through which a difficulty had to pass. Not consciously, not cruelly, but you know which relationships those were, and you know the small dissatisfaction you felt when someone you had been carrying began solving things alone. You called it worry at the time. It was something else standing next to worry, wearing its clothes. That is the shadow in this. And it is not that you were secretly selfish. It is that indispensability was your only tested method of being kept, and something in you protected it. You were not only trapped in the position, you also, in ways you never permitted yourself to see, defended it. Both are true. You were placed in that position by people who benefited from it and never examined it, and you held the position closed against anyone who might have made it unnecessary. Neither fact cancels the other, and you will not get to keep only the innocent one. What this means is that the arrangement was never entirely done to you. It was mutual, which is worse, because it removes the clean grievance you have been quietly holding and gives you something with no one to be angry at. Now the fear beneath it, you are afraid that if you stop, you will discover you were correct all along, that the position was in fact the whole basis of your inclusion, that the affection was attached to the function and will withdraw with it. Politely, over a few months, with no one saying anything cruel. and you are equally afraid of the other outcome, that some of them will stay, that they will stay and be glad and want something from you that has nothing to do with usefulness, and you will not know how to be in that room because you have never learned how to be present without a job. Notice which fear moves your body more. Notice that when you imagine being wanted without being needed, your chest tightens rather than opens. Notice that you have been calling that tightening modesty. It is not modesty, it is the accurate response of a person facing an exposure they have never survived. Because being needed has a floor under it. You know your value can be calculated, and calculated value cannot be withdrawn arbitrarily. Being loved has no floor. It is held by someone else, revisable at any time. For reasons you might never be told, you chose the arrangement with the floor, and you chose it repeatedly. So the compassion was real, and it was also the safest available position. And both of those have been true at once for your entire adult life. Jung understood that what we bury does not become false, it continues. Underneath, doing work, the conscious identity is not permitted to acknowledge. What has changed is not that you have become worse. It is that the buried part has grown too large to keep translating. The withdrawal in you is not a moral collapse. It is material returning that your idea of yourself could never previously admit into the room. And it is not asking your permission. This is the quality that most disturbs you. The reluctance arrives before you have consented to it. Your body has begun refusing in advance, going tired before conversations, going still under a familiar voice, answering with a delay you did not authorize. There is a particular loneliness in this stage that has no companion. You cannot describe it to the people it concerns, because describing it would end things you are not ready to end. You cannot describe it to anyone outside, because from outside your life looks like the life of a person doing well by everyone. So you carry it alone, and carrying it alone is precisely the same skill you have always used. Applied now to the one thing that skill was invented to avoid. The old competence has arrived to manage its own collapse. That is why nothing feels like progress. You have started rehearsing conversations that will never occur. In the car, in the shower, at 4 in the morning, you say the true sentence to the person it belongs to, and you watch their face fall in your imagination. And you stop, and you revise it into something kinder. And the revision is what you actually say when the moment comes. Each of those rehearsals is evidence you cannot dismiss. A person does not rehearse a sentence for months unless something in them intends to say it eventually. The rehearsals are not weakness. They are the slow assembling of something that has not yet found its occasion. And you cannot go back. That is the position you are now standing in. You cannot restore the old unconsciousness, because you have seen the exchange for what it was, and no one unsees a structure once it becomes visible. You also cannot step out, because there is no prepared elsewhere. You are between an arrangement you can no longer inhabit sincerely and a way of being with people you have never practiced once. Both are real. Neither is available. This is not a failure of courage. It is the shape of the interval itself. What you have gained here is small and does not comfort. It is only this. The unbearableness has stopped being a mystery about your character. You know now what it is measuring. Nothing announces itself. There is no conversation where you explain any of this. What happens instead is that a message sits unanswered for 6 hours, and then a day, and the world does not end, and something in your chest registers the survival of that day, like a fact. The changes are that small, a pause before you agree, a sentence you begin without first calculating how it will land, a phone call you take standing up, near the door, instead of settling in for the hour it usually takes. Nobody comments, but the arrangement notices before the people do. Then someone says it, usually gently, usually inside a sentence about something else. You seem distant lately. You have not been yourself. You used to be easier to reach. And there it is, the accusation you have been dreading for months, arriving in a tone so mild you cannot even object to it. Your first response is agreement. Of course, you apologize. You explain that work has been demanding. You promise to be better. The apology forms before you have examined whether anything requires apologizing for, and you can feel it forming, and this time you notice the forming. That noticing is the whole distance you have traveled. You still apologize, but there is now a gap between the impulse and the words, and inside that gap you can see what the apology is for, not for harm, for reduced availability. Those had always been the same thing, and now, for a moment, they are not. The people saying it are not being cruel. This matters, and you must not lose it in the anger. They are describing an accurate experience. Something they relied on has become less predictable, and they feel it as loss, and they have no language for what they actually miss. They may miss the function without knowing it is the function. Someone can love you genuinely and still be grieving access rather than you. Both things sit in the same person. They are not performing affection, and they are also not asking about the interior life you have been carrying alone for a year. What surprises you is who reacts most, not the people in genuine difficulty. The ones with a real crisis mostly cope, or find others, or barely register the difference. The strongest reaction comes from those who were never in trouble at all, only accustomed, and accustomed turns out to be the harder thing to withdraw from. A few of them will move away over the following months, quietly, no confrontation. The contact simply thins, and you will feel the confirmation of your oldest fear arrive without drama on an ordinary Tuesday while you are doing something unrelated, and it will hurt in a way you did not predict, not sharply, like a room that has become cooler. You will grieve it, and you will also notice, underneath the grief, that you are not surprised, and that not being surprised is itself a piece of information about what those relationships had been. But some of them stay. This is the part you never allowed yourself to plan for. Someone continues calling when you have nothing to offer them. Someone asks a question about you and then waits through the silence while you look for an answer, and does not fill it, and does not leave. You will handle that badly at first. You will feel the old machinery start up, the search for their difficulty, the reflex to convert the attention back toward them. Sometimes you will manage not to. Sitting still under someone's interest will feel more exposing than any amount of carrying ever did. Here is what has actually shifted, and it is smaller than transformation. The exhaustion is no longer evidence against you. When it arrives now, before a familiar name appears on the screen, you do not immediately convene the trial. You read it as information about an arrangement rather than as a verdict on your character. That distinction sounds minor written down. Lived, it changes almost everything, because it removes the mechanism that kept the whole structure standing. Guilt was the last wall. When tiredness stops meaning you are becoming a worse person, tiredness becomes something you can consult rather than something you must disprove. You will still give. This is not the end of your kindness, and it never was. You will still be the one people bring things to, and you will still be good at it, and much of it will still be freely meant. What has ended is the automatic quality, the answering before the question was fully asked. Sometimes you will choose the old response deliberately, knowing the cost, and it will feel entirely different from when there was no choice. The same action performed with consent is not the same action. That is the only freedom available here, and it is more than you had. And some days you will simply fail. The reflex will win. You will absorb something you did not want to absorb, and you will hear yourself doing it. You will not treat that as relapse. The role held for decades, it does not vacate because it has been seen once. What you must not do is make a new role out of this. There is a version of the awakened person that becomes its own performance, boundaried and observant and quietly superior to everyone still unconscious. That is the same structure with better vocabulary, and it would cost you the people who stayed, because they were not wrong to rely on you. Something real passed between you in all those years. Your attention helped people. Marriages held. Someone got through a winter. None of that becomes false, because you can now see what it was also doing for you. Hold both. You were placed in a position that took more than it returned, and you defended that position against anyone who might have made it unnecessary. You were used, and you arranged to be usable. Neither sentence is permitted to erase the other. The grief stays, not for the role. Exactly, for the years spent waiting for a conversion that was never coming, for the specific hope that if you carried enough, someone would eventually put down what they were holding and turn toward you and ask. That hope was not foolish. It was the most reasonable strategy available to someone who had been shown, early and consistently, that reliability was the surest way to be kept. You were not naive. You were working with the information you had. What you have now is different from healing. You have not become a person who receives easily or rests without guilt or knows what they want on a Sunday afternoon. Those may come slowly or partly or not at all. Nothing here has been completed. But the unbearableness has finished its work. It was never a warning about who you were becoming. It was the sensation of consent being withdrawn from an agreement you never made consciously, arriving in your body before it could reach your language. You are still tired. You will be tired for a while. Some evenings you will sit with a silence. You have no task inside, and it will feel less like peace than like a room you have not learned to occupy. And on one of those evenings, someone will need something from you, and before the yes assembles itself, there will be a pause where a question can now stand. Not refusal, only a pause. That pause is what has changed. Everything else is still standing. still expected, still arranged as it was, but the thing that made it feel like proof of your goodness has quietly stopped working, and it will not start again. The role kept its shape, it simply lost its authority over you.